So what's the big problem with wealth creation? How do people like us, who didn't inherit a boatload of money, who are investing and building wealth from our own blood, sweat and tears, how do we invest in a way that gives us remarkable results and become financially free before retirement age? I don't know about you, but I am sick of hearing from wealth gurus and experts who don't walk their own talk and prescribe strategies that are a one-size-fits-all approach. For self-made people like you and me, I'm here to tell you that you don't need to be superhuman or already wealthy to reach financial freedom earlier than 65. This is the Alternative Investing Podcast. So Al Ramos, it is really awesome to have you be on the podcast with us. Thank you very much for making time.
Thank you for the invitation. I hope it's worthy.
Well, look, you are someone who has a fascinating story. We've actually obviously known each other for some years now, being fellow Canberrans. I'd really love to kind of wind back to the beginning just to give people a bit of a flavour of who you are. Can you talk a little bit about your journey to becoming an accountant and how that's kind of played out through your career?
Sure. Basically I was born in Spain and my parents decided that, the opportunities in Spain at that time, back in the 60s, just weren't, Dad was working 3 jobs, Dad and Mum was working 1 job and looking after me. And we still struggled to make ends meet. And one of my other family members, an uncle, and then another guy who turned out to be an uncle later, he married one of my aunts by correspondence, actually. So there's a story in that in itself. They moved out here for the cane cutting sort of visas. They worked at that for a while and then lost their jobs because I think they introduced the cane cutting machinery and so forth. But over that time, they met other people and they got told about this huge construction site called Canberra and, that they should go down that way and they'll get plenty of work. And that's what they did. And so when they were down here, they wrote to Mum and Dad and said, look, if you guys aren't happy there, come here because there's heaps of work on and great opportunities. And that's what my parents did. So Dad came out 6 months ahead of Mum and I and then we joined him afterwards. And I guess, my memories of that time were a bit traumatic, actually. I had a very, very happy childhood. I actually still to this day recall, throwing myself to the tarmac when we were walking to the airplane, trying to cling with my claws to the tarmac to say, I don't want to leave my home. I don't want to leave this, this country. I want Dad to come back, but I don't want to go. And
no.
It was almost like this sense of being ripped away from your home. But nevertheless, once you got on the plane, you're a kid and you just get on with it and so be it. It certainly was interesting and challenging being dropped into a country that you had no connection with, didn't speak the language nor understood it. I didn't have any siblings or friends to turn to. And Mum and Dad were basically, from the minute they got here, they were just at work, so they'd leave at 6 a.m, they'd get home at sort of, 5:30 at night. So it was a pretty lonely sort of early time. And because I couldn't communicate, it was hard to even build friendships and so forth. So in a way, that sort of led to quite a lot of self-sufficiency and resilience and, independence and all those sort of virtues that have actually served me well over my life. As time went on, I learned a little mantra, which was don't worry about getting it right, just make it right. And so that took a fair bit of pressure off, how you embrace life, that whatever comes. And obviously, as we'll share later on, events do happen to you that you've got no control over. And the best thing you can do is try and focus on what you can control and make it as good as you can and not worry about, getting it perfect and right and all that sort of stuff. Just make it right.
I love that. Can I just ask just a bit more of an in-depth question? Clearly, you are someone who did not grow up with a silver spoon in their mouth. You've talked a little bit about the life lessons learned, and I definitely have witnessed in you a sense of grit and determination. But what about the money stuff? Like growing up, given the struggles that your parent had, what did money mean to you?
Money's sort of like a facilitator of choices. I was really fortunate growing up in a fabulous family. Family life was magnificent. And you learn to live simply because you didn't have, and because you don't know what you don't know until you know, then I didn't miss anything. For me that was life. Yes, I didn't have endless toys and all that sort of stuff, but therefore, whatever I had, I used to look after. I remember when I had Sue and I had Matthew, our first child, and, when he was, 2 or something, I introduced some of my original toys that I got when I first got to Australia. And the little bugger destroyed them within the space of weeks.
Oh, no.
And I was destroyed myself because I thought, hang on a minute. I looked after these things. I played with them, but I used to, keep them sharp and keep them well, And I guess that the lack of funds and so forth was never a burden, or was never something that I carried as a cross, or that I was missing out. I just got on with whatever I got and whatever I experienced. I managed to suck the juice out of, and enjoy it. So from that point of view, I am lucky that somehow I got that lottery ticket that, I do see life through the glass half full rather than half empty perspective. And so from that point of view, it made life a lot easier in that regard,
Let me ask you then, because one of the things I find really fascinating is how people's relationship to money can change over time. Clearly, you kind of found a career as an accountant, and you went on to pretty much, in my mind, get to the top of the totem pole, if you like, in terms of what can be achieved as an accountant, owning your own firms, partner at Big Four, blah, blah, blah. Like the list was endless. So from a relationship with money perspective, the affluence came, right? I mean, there was no avoiding that you earned great money. How would you describe the transition in your views around money as you started to get more career success?
Let me take you back to the early days, because I think that there was a bit of an imprint on me about the importance of working hard and the importance of looking for opportunity, I guess, in the journey that my parents went through and that I obviously went through, along with them. But I was more an observer rather than a participant, so to speak, because I was a kid. But seeing how hard they worked, I figured that somewhere there had to be an easier way. There had to be some other button or some other device, mechanism, methodology that would give you more opportunity and therefore, more choices and better choices. Not to say that my parents didn't do well. They came here with nothing, not the language, not anything, and were able to, own their own home. They had a little rental property that was more of a pain in the backside than anything else. And we never sort of, had to say no to, I never got too many times that I said, no, you can't do this or can't do that. That said, I didn't sort of ask for Porsches and Ferraris at that point in my life either. But I guess there was this simmering thought. And there was, I suppose, from that, an expectation that I was going to do well, that there was this expectation in our house that I would go to university. Because that's why we came to this country, to give you a better go in life, mate. That became a bit of a burden in a way, because, I do recall actually sitting outside of the Greek conferring auditorium with my degree in my hand. I said to Dad, put your hand out. And he said, what are you talking about? He said, put your hand out. And he put his hand out and I gave it to him. I said, accounts fully settled, Dad. And he looked at me, he said, what are you talking about? I said, well, all this carry on about coming here and giving me opportunities, that's it. The opportunity has been realised, He just laughed, he didn't get it, that I'd been carrying this burden all this time. And, I remember sitting at exams and worrying about failing, not because I'd be failing me and I'd have to go and do the damn thing again, but I'd be failing my parents. And that commitment that they'd made to come to this country and leave their family and their language and all those other things, which is, terribly sort of, courageous of them, and that I'd be failing, So there was a degree of that perspective. Certainly, as I became more in control of my earnings, once I went through school and I often say I stumbled into studying economics and accounting. For me, it was almost like my vision and my journey and my destination is to get to university. And then once I got to university, I thought, oh, bugger, now what am I going to do? And I had no idea. I had no idea what I was going to do. I remember driving in to registration thinking, so what do I do? And I thought, oh, gee, economics. I did all right at economics at school. I'll go to the economics faculty. And so I went along to the economics faculty and I signed in and they said, okay, right now you need to do for this particular economics degree, you need to do a double major. And I said, well, why? Well, because that's the way the degree's conferred. You've got to have a second major. I said, well, what's available? And they said, there's statistics and there's modern history, ancient history, there's, accounting, there's all manner of different things. And I said, well, what's the majority doing? Oh, accounting's pretty popular. Yeah, sign me up for that. So that's literally how sort of much effort and energy I put and thought and planning into becoming an accountant. As we progressed through the degree, I found economics a bit sort of waffly. There was too many suppositions and too many assumptions and too much, whereas accounting, 1 + 1 is always equal 2, unless you're a particularly creative accountant. But there was a lot about accounting that there was precision, and there was, a sense of control and a sense of order and all that sort of stuff. And so I did my economics and accounting degrees, but towards the end, I thought, okay, well, if I'm going to go and get a job, it'll be in accounting. And that's how I got into that. So I started off with a local firm that actually rebranded probably within 6 months of me joining into Deloitte Haskins and Sells. So there's quite an irony there that I actually started my career with Deloitte Haskins and Sells and ended my career with Deloitte Haskins and Sells, or Deloitte Touche Tomatsu as they're now known. So quite a 360-degree circle. But basically at that point, once you start earning money, then you start thinking of possibilities, and I guess the beauty of studying accounting, it does give you better insight around, how the world works. And I had some economics background behind me as well. And so I thought this could be the opportunity for me to do something more than just work for my money. And it was, you may recall, I think you're very bit young, but back in the day, the CA qualification required this thing called the professional year of study, which now is the CA program. And back in those days, it was a 1-year intensive program, and you either failed it or you passed it. And if you failed it, you had to redo the whole year again, not just the module. And so there was high stress involved in all that thing. But anyway, fortunately, I found another like-minded beast, and in a fellow by the name of Andrew Pickering, and he and I actually launched out and bought our first rental property. What would have that been? That would have been my second year of work. And we bought our first rental property together. And of course, you want to make sure that you're earning decent rent. So we moved both our girlfriends in there to live. And so Sue was not only my girlfriend, but she was my first ever tenant. And
wow.
That was a double-edged sword because we'd end up having to do all the gardening. But nevertheless, that was the first sort of start with it. And as I said, there was a sort of an evolutionary perspective or insight starting to come to me around the need. And in fact, I sort of embraced debt. I found that debt was my best saving weapon. If I didn't have debt, I struggled to save. I'd struggle to just put money aside. Whereas if you gave me okay, you've got this mortgage or you've got this personal loan. So I had a personal loan for a car at one point, and I just smashed that thing. I was a man with a mission, And the same thing with my mortgages, So it became a good way of actually forcing me to manage my earnings much more effectively and then oversubscribe the payments so that, I always got rid of my debt very, very quickly. But what it did, it started to help me build some equity. And so that was the journey from there. And I did my accreditation with Deloitte, and as a lot of people tend to do with these big firms, they'll go in there, they do 2 or 3 or 4 years, and then they take those credentials and go to another firm. And there was a local firm which was a really entrepreneurial business firm. Now, they were really focused on helping entrepreneurs improve their business and grow their business. So there was much more of a management orientation to them than just the compliance, tick the box and comply with all the legislation and whatever else perspective. And that was transformative for me. That was where I discovered my real passion, So whereas I trained as an accountant, but when you look at how long did I actually practice as a traditional accountant, it was probably only about half a dozen years. And then I started through that period, worked through developing my capabilities and skill sets in the advisory role, so really helping people with their business strategy and, the performance improvement side of things and so forth. That was the interesting journey.
Quite a journey.
Through that sort of formative period,
Can I ask you just on that note, one of the things that has always struck me about you in particular, and I probably share this quality, which is why I saw it in you straight away, is you're not your typical accountant. You've definitely got an entrepreneurial bent. I kind of picked up from what you just said, and I have observed it in other ways, that you have a nature, which is when you can gamify something, then you're all in. And so if we kind of, maybe turn the conversation a little bit towards at what point in your life do you think you became a conscious investor? You mentioned that you bought your first investment property early on. But I think, I also get the sense the play of business was also part of your investing game.
Yeah.
So at what point in your life did you start thinking of yourself as an investor, and what was it that made you think that?
Well, working at that particular firm, it was really entrepreneurial, as I said. And we were, I think, one of the first ever accounting firms to list on the main board. And at that point, we owned a mail order company, we owned a printing company, we owned something like about 7 property trusts of all manner of size and order. And basically, we accountants within the accounting firm would go in and act as almost virtual CFOs for these different businesses. So it gave me great exposure to that whole concept of the leverage and value of running a business and what makes a good business versus not so good business, but also the whole journey of wealth development, because that's ultimately what this is all about, and using the different vehicles. And so in that, we got encouraged to participate in the property trust. So that was, at the end, we had fairly large property trusts, but the early days, there were small private deals that we used to facilitate for clients. And so, of course, part of that was, well, hang on, I'll chuck my $5,000 in there or $10,000 in there. So I got a lot of exposure to that whole investment scenario and different investment options through my work. And it gave me a good amount of, I guess, confidence around some of the due diligence processes that, give you that additional sort of support and confidence in making decisions to pursue those options when maybe my other brethren that were doing compliance work and whatever were a bit more mortified and horrified that, I was having a crack at some of these things, So, and I think that there's a lesson in that for your own program where, I think that the minute that people sort of hear that you're going over to America and investing in America and bloody hell, what are you doing? Do you know it? Yeah. Well, yes, but, come and talk to us about the journey you have to go on in order to inform yourself, grow your capability, build your confidence, test it, and then refine it. And then you've earned the stripes and the right to go out there and do it, with greater confidence. It's not as simple as just, let's jump on a plane, go over to America and chuck the money around. Plenty of people have been burned on that one, as you well know.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I'd love to kind of ask you about, your investing objectives. Obviously, when you started out and you were participating in quite a variety of very entrepreneurial style of investments, what were the thoughts running through your mind around objective? Like, what was the point? What was the end game? And then how has that shifted over time?
Those early years, what do they say? Show me the 7-year-old and I'll show you the man or the woman, Those early years of my life were very formative in terms of, framing how I thought and behaved around, the whole sort of wealth development, all that sort of stuff. The thing about being a good provider was this sort of core value that my dad, invested in me from an early stage. So there was perspective there that, yes, I'm going to do well, but what does well mean? It's not just about having flash cars and flash suits and, labels and all that sort of stuff. There has to be some substance there. And part of that is about being a good provider. And part of being a good provider is having some wealth that supports or that creates the security of choices and so forth. So there was that sort of underlying, drive within me that, I wanted to it wasn't about, kudos and being flashy. It was more around security and building some sort of foundation that would give me an opportunity to then build the rest of my life, including sort of with my life partner and family and all that sort of stuff. So there was that sort of longer term perspective, and that whole provider driver was pretty key and crucial to it.
With your permission, I'd love to kind of fast forward to more recent history. Just before you and I reconnected and started working together, you'd been through a relatively traumatic event. Can you just, even if you don't want to maybe go into the detail around that, could you talk a little bit about how that changed your perspective around money and wealth and urgency?
Yeah, life was going along swimmingly, and the usual ebbs and flows of life. And as I consider myself, really fortunate that Sue and I were sort of married, and we had 3 lovely kids. I was able to set up my business at just before the kids, as almost like a decision about how I wanted to have kids and have my life, where I had more. So I was a partner at Touche Ross back in those days. I could have stayed in that big corporate environment, but you're not your own boss. You don't have a degree of control. And so that was a great catalyst for me to set up my business. And so we got to a stage where I actually had a knock on the door by Deloitte, and I managed to sell the business to them. I stayed on with them for a while and finished up with them. And then all of a sudden, and I've always been keen on athleticism and being fit and so forth, probably too much. I had to give away my soccer, which is my passion, after 2 years, 2 ankle reconstructions. And a friend of mine introduced me to CrossFit, of all things, as my rehab exercise program. And anyway, long story short, during my journey with Deloitte, there was a fair bit of stress, and I thought, okay, I'll compensate and I'll go to CrossFit 6 times a week instead of 3 or 4 times a week. And I didn't realize that over exercising actually creates as much negativity in your body as what under exercising can do. And therefore I'm already in stress. I'm adding extra stress. So I created almost like a vat of stress that I was living in. And unfortunately my body suddenly said, mate, this is not good. And I got fed the card of getting neck and throat cancer in, when was it? I think it was August 2019. I was finally diagnosed, and that was a shock. Certainly to think that I'd never smoked, I wasn't a big drinker, but and at the time I didn't stop to think why. I thought it is what it is. Where's the solution? I'm always 20% on the problem, 80% on the solution guy. So what do I need to do? Who do I need to see? If they tell me to do 3 backflips and 14 push-ups, I'll do 4 backflips and 28 push-ups. You know what I mean? Because I was just committed to getting this thing resolved. Now, since then, I've been able to reflect and sort of work out, certain things that happened around the time that I thought, okay, that could be a contributing factor. Therefore, let's learn and try and cut some of those things out of my life going forward. But yeah, so the cancer thing was something that in the first instance, it was about bloody-mindedness, getting through it, getting it fixed and whatever else. And, just a couple of months ago, I had my 3-year anniversary in remission. So it's all good. Every 6 months I go in and have my heart in my mouth for a few moments. And towards the end of the session, I get the all clear, and that gives me some encouragement that I'm on the way. But I guess the thing that you learn from these things is that, the unexpected will happen. So, it's more about how do you form your preparedness rather than your predicting process. I think you need to live life more prepared and less predicting, because I think that predicting is, there's just too much change about and too difficult to get it right. What that whole journey did for me was that it gave me a reality check of how important now is. And we all know people, and I'm sure that we've probably fallen into the trap ourselves, that you often reflect and can actually carry crosses from the past about what happened, what he did, she did, should have done, could have done, would have done, all that sort of stuff. And that's just wasting the moment that we've got. And then equally, there's people who live in the future, and it's like, when all these ducks line up, then I'll do X or I'll do Y. And you sort of think, again, you're just wasting the moment now. And this is the moment that you've got. So why wouldn't you just try and focus on the moment and suck the juice out of it and just contribute as much as you can and enjoy what you've got? So extending that further, one of the things that it illustrated was Sue's vulnerability, financial management vulnerability. That if I drop off the perch, I feel I've done a pretty good job of structuring ourselves. We've got trusts, we've got super funds, we've got this, and we've got the other thing. But they're not easy things for the kind person to really grab hold of and feel that they've got their hand around the steering wheel of. And particularly from a point of view of taking a wealth base and continuing to manage it and be able to feel confident doing that. And in her case, she'd always left it up to me because that was my area of expertise, just as I left up to her a lot of the things around the kids' support and the home support and all that sort of stuff. And we played our roles. So it forced us to rethink that. So coming out of getting the first tick, that you've done the radiation treatment, the chemo treatment, and we've done the scans, and it looks like we've killed everything, Ramos. It's all good to go. That was a priority that I thought we need to think about. How do we actually bring your capability up and give you some resource that can support you in the event that I drop off the perch? And so I remember, that you and I had crossed paths many, many years earlier through our old friend Mick. And I thought, I might just reach out and see what you're doing. And it was through that avenue that then we started to explore, what you were providing. But there was another driver behind that as well. And it sort of talks to this concept of legacy. We had been fortunate that we'd accumulated a modest asset pool. But where we had it invested here in Australia, it was probably earning, let's say, 3 to 5% per annum. And that just wasn't going to be enough to fulfill the needs of our lifestyle choices as they were. And so it meant that we either start to eat the cow as we go, or we compromise our lifestyle choices and therefore moderate those choices. And the other option that I thought of was, well, hang on, how do we get better returns? Because if we can get returns up to 8 to 10% return, it doesn't just fix the problem, it transforms the opportunity. Because then all of a sudden, whereas in the position we were in, we were thinking, well, in terms of how can we help and what can we offer the kids whilst we're still here on this earth and kicking around and have the opportunity to see the benefits of our assistance. We were thinking, well, I'll just have to make do with whatever we have left when we drop off the perch, which is quite typical of many families. But when we started to look at, well, if 8 to 10% were achievable, then that changes the whole perspective of how you think about legacy, because it means that, I did some calculations and it said, all right, well, what we can do is there's a chunk of our existing portfolio that we can put aside and nominate that to the family asset. And so I then started to explore more and more around that. I came across someone talking about a family bank. And I thought, wouldn't that be sweet if we could have a little bank there that we could build the value of and start to provide it as a resource, a facilitating resource for the kids to do certain key things in life, whether it be own their own home, whether it be provide some education, whether it be help them out in a crisis, whatever the situation might be. That became really energizing to me. There was two perspectives when I looked at going down the track with your program. One was, how do we help Sue get more control and get some resource around it? How do we start to actually realize the reality of this better performance so that it gives us a better opportunity to build some legacy, with and for the kids, whilst we're still here able to enjoy and see the value and the benefit of that. And then I suppose, since then, there's that other layer to say, okay, well, how do we then use what we're learning and what we're doing and how we're doing it to teach them and start to give them better and greater confidence and capability to manage this portfolio that we'd be looking to help them build. And hopefully that they might see the value of that and even tip in some of their own and hopefully build this family asset pool that sees multi-generational value as an opportunity. So, in typical Ramos style, sort of, 1 + 1 = 351 and thinking, oh, wow, it's fantastic.
Oh, look, Al, I really appreciate some of the comments you've made there. There's a lot of gold there. And certainly, working with you has been phenomenal because you are very coachable and open to taking a very holistic approach. I think the other thing that's great with you, Al, is you ask one question and you answer 10. So I feel you've pretty much answered all the questions I was going to ask. The only thing that I'd love to kind of, finish up with is there are a lot of people out there who are really struggling financially, whether it's day to day or with their wealth building. There's a lot of frustration in the market. I mean, it's hard because it's partly your nature to be quite exploratory, but what was it that made you kind of think, no, I really need to look at alternative investments as part of my mix? And what kind of, not so much advice, but insight would you share on the subject of that as an asset class?
I always knew from my own experiences with the entrepreneurial firm locally and so forth that, and just, knowing that there are networks in Australia that have got access to really good deals. But the bulk of us never even know that those things exist and rarely even hear about. And I call them like the clubs, these little clubs. And in many regards, that's what you've been able to tap into, but in America rather than here in Australia. And so I knew that there were these deals. I just didn't know where the door was to even go knocking or trying to barge through. And so therefore, when I looked at your stuff, it said, well, this is exactly what you're offering, is a whole bunch of knowledge and know-how and capability, but also access to some of these doors where there's people with proven capability and all the rest of it. And so look, whether it's alternative, whether it's traditional, whether it's a banana, a peach or an orange, it really comes back to fundamentals. It comes back to what objectives are you trying to achieve? It comes back to what's the essence of the investment? Does it make sense? Does it stack up? Is there some track record there? What's your due diligence process for really going through and analysing and checking? Like that due diligence process should be equally strong and capable and robust to go and look at whether I buy BHP shares. There are obviously differences, and that's part of where the education fits in, so that then you go there knowing what to ask and what else to ask. But for me, I've never been married to a particular type of investment vehicle or whatever. I've been pretty open to anything's possible, but there's certain parameters that you need to have that helps you use it almost like as a lens for your decision and your choice making. And I think that having a good foundation of what your objectives are is critical to keep your feet on the ground, because very few of us have actually seen over the many years that we've been around one-hit wonders that just, take you to the stratosphere and you're done. More often than not, for every one of those, there's thousands and thousands of failures, So don't go looking for the one-hit wonder. It's nice and steady type of returns and nice and steady performance is what you're after. Well, if that's what I'm after, then let's use that as part of the lens for how we sieve out the opportunities. And so alternative investments, for me, they made sense because I'd been there and done that with that firm here in Canberra. I remember one of the first private property trusts that we put together that I was involved with. I did all the accounting stuff and the secretarial stuff for it, was Centre Court in Fyshwick, where we bought Centre Court as an asset, and we then strata titled it, and we sold the individual units, and we cashed it up, and everyone made a mozza, and everything was fantastic. So a lot of the stuff the guys in America are doing is not foreign to me. And so from that point of view, the alternative investment field was common ground, was known ground. The debt instruments that they are doing and so forth, again, it makes sense to me because of a lot of my finance, economics, accounting background. For me, it was a bit of a no-brainer. Going back to others, so Sue's had more of a learning curve, steeper learning curve than I have, but I take my hat off to her. She's probably the only one that she struggles to keep up with is Eric, of course, but I think most of us do that. But I think for anyone that's doing it tough, I think the first thing that I would suggest is go to the gym, the mental gym. Okay, do some study, do some reading, but more importantly, don't go reinventing the wheel. Go and talk to someone who's doing it and learn from them. And that's probably the power of the community that you've been able to put together. Having people in there that have done different things, have got different exposures, different experiences, and they're willing to share that. And I think is a crucial part, is where it makes everyone better and stronger than individually, no matter who you are. And I think that from that point of view, that would probably be the first decision that I would be saying to people, do a little bit of investigation, find some good people that have done it and are doing it, and tag along. And most people love telling you about what they're doing and how they're doing it. If they can help and add value to others, more often than not, they will. And then I think that the next bit is have a crack, test. What do they say in marketing? You come up with a strategy, you test it, you refine it, you innovate it, you develop it, you test it again. And I think that investing is like that as well. There's no guarantees out there. So therefore, test it with what you can afford. Every time that you test it with an analytical mind. What worked? What didn't work? How can I do it better? What did then this other person just tell me? Can I do it differently? Can I go to a different option? And I think that having that sort of attitude, that learning attitude, but an implemented learning attitude rather than just a theoretical knowledge attitude will help you navigate to success for sure.
There's so much gold in what you just shared, Al. And just to kind of round this out, I just want to make the comment that your wife, Sue, was definitely someone who probably didn't have the confidence around money and wealth building when she started this journey. But credit to her, I think, God forbid she ever had to continue the journey on her own, she'd be doing it with a high degree of confidence and interest, in fact. So congratulations to the pair of you. And thank you so, so much for sharing so candidly about, your journey and how you've made this phenomenal pivot.
My pleasure. And hopefully some gems in there that people see as valuable. If they want to follow me up and get a little bit more detail, I'm an open book, happy to have a chat to anyone, and good luck to everyone, particularly the community.
Thanks so much, Al. Take care.
Take care. Bye.
You've been listening to the Alternative Investing Podcast. If you're feeling frustrated that despite doing everything right in the property investing playbook and you're no closer to financial freedom, then head on over to incosiwealth.com to learn more about how you can use alternative investments to catapult your investing income and blend strategies to shave decades off your timeline to financial freedom. See you on the next episode.